I really love this story. This story ran in the New York Times in 2018. And this is like a very important thing about what I want to say about this. The with these adoptees, there's been this assumption that they're so lucky. They're so lucky to have been adopted, and many of them are. Many of them, escaped very poor villages, but not entirely. And when I did this visit, I thought that actually the Chinese family might have been wealthier than the adoptive family because, um, they had China had changed so much from 2002 when the girl was taken to 2019 that they were living in this big house. All the members of the family were working, and so this story ran in the New York Times right before the trip, and it says, imagine you have to make a bet. There are two 18-year-olds, one in China, the other in the United States, both poor and short on prospects. You have to pick the one with the better chance of upward mobility. This story, which ran just a few months before our trip, the girls were 18 at the time, concluded that China had much more opportunities for advancement. And this was kind of true at the time. Shuangjia, was on a career path, working not a she hadn't gone to university, but she had gone to a teaching school, and she was on her way to a career. Whereas Esther, who had been homeschooled, had um, really seemed to have very little career prospects at the time. Um, this is the house in China that they had built. If you remember, the earlier photo showed kind of a log cabin. So anyway, I mean, this is pretty much the end. Things changed a lot. That was my impression at the time of the reunion, which was 2019, after COVID, or during the COVID lockdown. Shuangjia lost her job, and then a lot of the private kindergartens were closed for good by Xi Jinping, who does not approve of private education. And in the meantime, Esther, who's very entrepreneurial, has had really an excellent self-made career as a wedding photographer and is really doing very well.
Right.
So, hard to say. She inherited that kind of Texas can-do attitude. Um, I don't know. It's, you know, are they the lucky girls? Adoptees do not like being told that they are the lucky girls. They That's like, don't say that.
And Barbara, one of the people in the audience, they have a question that sort of takes us a little bit further in the timeline here. They want to know if the girls have met in person in the U.S. Has Shuangjia made a trip to the U.S. and has she experienced life in the U.S. with Esther or Fang Fang?
No, and that might have happened if not for COVID, because we had talked about that at the time of the trip, and but everything shut down in early 2020 and didn't reopen until 23, and now it's become just impossible. I mean, it would be very almost impossible for her to get a visa to the US under the current political climate, and probably not so easy for her to get a a passport, which she doesn't have.
Right.
So everything kind of stalled during COVID.
Yeah, I think there might be an opening right now for this to happen because Trump and with the Trump Xi meeting coming up next year, I think there's actually like a warming or stability in relations right now. And Trump has said that he wants many Chinese students to come to the US. So
Yeah,
um,
possible,
you could
but
set it
we
up.
we definitely lost the momentum because we had planned to do it in 2020.
Right. And another, Nicole asks in the chat whether you've gotten adverse reactions to the book or to reporting on adoptees from families that have adopted Chinese children because they might not want to be confronted with the notion that their kid, their adopted kid, was stolen or came from some dark history in China. So it's just they're wondering whether you've had sort of negative, there's been negative reaction to your book and your articles.
Actually, I would have expected more than I got. And I think, if you read the book, it's pretty forgiving of actually, there's nothing to forgive of the adoptive families. I mean, many of the people who adopted from China thought that this was the most ethical of international adoptions. The scandals had not come out till much later. Um, and something that I should mention is that these kids who were taken, are not the majority. Somebody who was advising me thought that maybe 10% were taken, and they were taken really after 2000. And this was, we all heard about supply chain problems during COVID, but this was supply chain. There was an enormous demand for um, healthy adoptable babies. And at that time, China was getting much wealthier, and Chinese families were just not willing to give up their daughters. And um, the system was dependent on this money from the adoptive parents, and that's really why the babies were taken. They needed this money coming in. Um, but the other thing I want to say is I think that this narrative of, girls thrown away, discarded, has been very damaging to adoptees. And I try, rather than to use abandoned, relinquished, because I think the vast majority of girls, were relinquished by their families. They weren't taken, but I don't think they would have been relinquished without the pressures of the one child policy.
Right. And the way that the family planning officials enacted that policy, right, in very coercive ways.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, maybe some, really did not want another girl, but I think they would have, a very few would have been abandoned.
And at this point, at some point in these intervening years, the practice of adopting from China sort of ends, right? Like from international adoptions from China, it's almost unheard of now, right? There's
Yeah,
the policy is
it's been completely stopped. And even when after these stories came out in 2009, and I'll say, something else I'd want to add here is there were a lot of Chinese journalists who were working on these stories. I mean, I got credit for breaking the story along with a couple of other American journalists. But the Chinese journalists knew about this, and a lot of them were tracking it, but they weren't allowed to write. But after my stories came out, it was officially a scandal. And so it did get a lot of attention. It was a cover story and session, and it adoptions really fell off after that, 2009, 2010. But also they were just running out of children.
right. And they've ended the one child policy because of that now.
They've done, yeah, and I mean, just it's really pretty hysterical because the family planning officials who used to take away the babies are now, giving out rice cookers and water bottles and sometimes cash as incentives to have more babies because the population is declining so
Yeah. I
quickly.
think it's one of the greatest ironies of contemporary China. So Patricia asks, have the twins stayed in touch?
Sort of. I mean, they send messages to each other on WeChat, but they don't speak the same language. And even with the translation built into WeChat, it's really hard to have much of a relationship. Strangely, Esther stays more in touch with her birth mom, and her birth mom, Zanhua, is really has very marginal literacy, but they just send each other's pictures and emojis, and and every New Year's since our reunion, they've had like an online talk.
I'm curious whether has Esther tried studying Chinese or learning Chinese in order to have better conversations with her family back in China?
She has not, and it's strange, but I've noticed this that many adoptees, there's a certain trauma associated with their mother tongue, and she hasn't.
Hmm.
And it's because she's very smart, but um, yeah, she was over two when she was adopted, and Marcia was told at the orphanage that, oh, she talks a lot and she helps fold the laundry and she's like, she's very precocious, but the language never came back.
Hmm. Bill wants to know what your take is on U.S.-China relations right now.
Oh, I think you're the one who, Ed, you're in a better position
Right.
to.
Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, just very quickly, I don't want to take away from talking about the book. Trump and Xi are seeking some stability in the relationship. They're going to meet in April. They met recently in on the sidelines of a summit in Asia. So right now, and Trump's rolling back some of its tariffs. So right now, there's a like almost sort of truce in the trade war. Trump is surrounded by China hawks, people who want to take a much more aggressive position on China, but I think Trump himself is not a China hawk. There's been a huge misperception in recent years about Trump and his take on China. He thinks China screwed the US on trade, but in many other things, he admires China, including Xi Jinping's authoritarian approach to governing. So that's my encapsulation of it. And Caro asks whether there were any repercussions for you personally from the Chinese government during your research and publishing this book.
Um, no, but I haven't applied for a visa to go back to China. So, if I do, I might not, if I do apply, I might not get a visa. I mean, I don't think that my book before this about Tibet was actually much more sensitive. Um, this one, I mean, it has, there's a lot of criticism of corruption in China, but at the same time, there's a lot that it says about Chinese, how Chinese society has advanced, both in its attitudes towards women and, economically. And this family in particular, as I said, is quite, quite pro Communist Party, as they said, it's like, oh, yeah, we supported the one child policy. We just didn't want to follow it. You know.
And I think the one thing that audience members who aren't that familiar with China should know is that many people in China are actually very supportive of the leadership in Beijing. It's not like it's a country that's ripe for revolution or an overthrow of the central leadership. They might be skeptical of local officials, as many people are, for example, family planning officials back in the day, but that in general, they're fairly supportive of the central government and of the leadership of Xi Jinping. Is that right, Barbara?
Yeah, I think so. And this family is a perfect example. As I said, when I saw them in 2009, they were in a log cabin, and now they're in this three-story house, and they have, as I said, all their kids are working, contributing money, and they have, gosh, they have like four grandchildren now. I mean, they're very happy.
Mm,
They're really sort of pleased
right.
with the advancement in their lives. They were the birth parents were, born sort of, after the Great Leap Forward, but in a period when China was very, very poor. They didn't have their own clothes. They just had hand-me-down clothes. They never ate meat. They never had eggs. And, their lifestyle has just, improved so much. And these are very ordinary people. They're not, nobody is particularly educated. They're real Lao Baixing, as they're called in China, but their lot in life is much better. And I think because they're not political and they're not intellectual, some of the things we hear from Chinese journalists, artists, academics about, feeling like life has been closed off.
Mhm.
don't affect them as much.
Right. And during COVID, the white paper protests that arose to protest Xi Jinping's lockdowns and zero COVID policy were among better educated people in large cities in China, not
Yeah.
so much in the rural areas. So,
Yeah.
um,
I do think though that the job market is slow and that it's, as here, very difficult for young people to get jobs.
right.
I mean, the economy is not great,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. It's a problem in many countries around the world at the moment, like the young people, unemployment among young people. So someone in the chat asked, will do you think Esther will go back to China again?
you've got to read the book. But in one of the last scenes with her, I asked her, "Do you think you're going to go back to China?" And she said, "Oh yeah, of course, but I want to go to Italy first." So,
Right.
I think she got a certain level of peace and resolution by going, but I don't know that she's dying to go back.
So, great. Well, and as Barbara just said, we urge everyone to read the book because it's an amazing narrative,
It's,
um, and
this is the American edition. Here's the British edition. Very different covers.
great. Both are great covers. It's very cinematic and very gripping. So I guess we'll take one more question. I see one popping up here. What are you considering researching next? Good question.
Um, Probably not China because I don't know that I could do another book like this. I'm actually working on a book about Berlin.
Hmm.
So I'm going back to, back to my roots because my first foreign posting was Berlin. And it's not as easy to report in China as it was. To be honest, I had very few problems with this book. I'm pretty good at traveling discreetly, but I was never detained or hassled.
In
But
Tibet, you dressed up as a Tibetan woman, if I like in Tibetan robes too, and walked around there, if I remember.
not exactly, because I didn't, we have this thing we're not supposed to disguise ourselves, but I wore like a very like long coat and a really ugly hat that like no foreign
A
correspondent
foreigner would
would
have
wear.
worn. Yeah,
Yeah, so I bring my
you were
hat.
making it seem a bit fuzzy, their
It was
identity.
like it was a really weird, a really weird hat. I called it my vanishing hat out of Harry Potter
Right.
because somehow I just didn't, at worst I looked like a Russian traitor.
Mhm.
But I had a lot of misadventures in Tibet. I was, bitten by a dog when I was undercover, and I fell into a sewage ditch in this town that had no water or electricity. I mean, that was much more arduous than this book.
Right.
I mean, this book was arduous too because it was really remote parts of China, but
Well, that's a good note too. And since we're talking foreign correspondents and other journalists, and it's good to talk about to mention that trade craft that you engaged in. So,
yeah, yeah.
um, thanks to everyone for coming, and you all know Barbara's work, and this book is as compelling as anything she's written in the past. So make sure to get your copy, and when you run to her, she'll sign it for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.